From Nashville, this is William Henry. This is Dreamland. Welcome, everyone. Theoretical physicist Michio Kaku was 8 years old when Einstein died in 1955. And he remembers seeing a picture of his mysterious unfinished manuscript lying on his desk and hearing adults talk in hushed tones about the physicist's life, his death, and his impossible dream of unifying the laws of physics. Kaku was to make it his life's goal to pursue this dream. Dr. Kaku holds the Henry Semet Chair in Theoretical Physics at the City University of New York. He's a leading authority on the future and on Einstein's theory of everything. Cultivating a love for futuristic technology that began as a child, today he's known globally as the visionary co-founder of string field theory, one of the main branches of string theory, which is the leading candidate for the unified field theory. He could be the first person to read the mind of God. Michio Kaku is the author of the international bestsellers Hyperspace, a scientific odyssey through parallel universes, time warps in the 10th dimension, and Visions, how science will revolutionize the 21st century. His latest book, Physics of the Impossible, is a scientific exploration into the world of phasers, force fields, teleportation, and time travel. His website is www.mkaku, that's Kaku.org. While he believes human civilization is currently undergoing its most critical transition, he would likely agree that now is the time to dream the impossible dreams. His work gives us courage to reach out with every ounce of imagination and touch the unreachable stars, both inner and outer. This is our quest, and we are fortunate to have Michio as our guide and as our honored guest. Michio, welcome to Dreamland.
Glad to be on Dreamland.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so inspiring following your work over these years, and now with your new book out, you're getting ready to do events at the Smithsonian, the Franklin Institute, Caltech, MIT, the Hayden Planetary Museum. So thank you once again for sharing this time with us.
Thank you. And the book, by the way, just hit number 18 on the New York Times bestseller list. This was quite unexpected. The book is now officially on the New York Times bestseller list.
Well, congratulations. Thanks for making that announcement. Something we try to do here on Dreamland is keep our listeners on the cutting edge of science and technology and to push the limits of the possible. I mean, that's why I think there's such a thirst for that, and you've probably found that in your own work.
That's right. Everywhere I go, I see a real thirst for knowledge. Publishers and movie people and TV people, they say science doesn't sell. People want soap operas. They want cotton in their brain. But, the fact that Stephen Hawking, my colleague, sold over 10 million copies of his books shows that there's a real hunger out there. And recently I've been filming with the History Channel, the Universe series, and that got the third year. The third year got approved. People want to know what's out there. Is anyone out there? They want to know what is our role in the universe. They really want to know these things.
Recently, legendary writer and science evangelist Arthur C. Clarke completed his 90th and final orbit of the sun. It's been said he was so influential, a visionary, and contributed so much to technological culture that one could hardly tell where his imagination ends and our reality begins. And I have to say, you're a likely person to follow in his footsteps and take that role now. Do you see yourself in that role?
Well, I see one phrase, one sentence that Arthur C. Clarke said that I quote in the book and I take as a guiding principle, and that is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And things that we consider magic, things that are preposterous, impossible, things that can't possibly exist, well, we physicists take them very seriously because maybe it's just a question of engineering.
Absolutely. And Clarke, as he talked about, he reminisced in his last message to the world about how much the world changed from the 1920s throughout his short lifetime. And you talk about that as well in your book, being the children of World War II-era Japanese parents who were held in concentration camps. And talk about that time period and the influences that came into your life at that time.
Well, think about the world that our parents grew up in. That was before airplanes, before automobiles, in fact, electricity, telephone. And now we have, the Internet, we have iPods, we have gadgets galore. But now think about the future. Think about the possibility of invisibility, teleportation, telepathy, starships, antimatter engines. These things our children our children could very well take for granted. And in the book, Physics of the Impossible, I really get down to the nitty-gritty. I interview the scientists who are making invisibility possible, the scientists working on teleportation. This is just not idle fantasy and after-dinner chatter. This is real work done by real scientists to really show that things that are impossible could very well become possible.
And you divide the seemingly impossible, and you have that in quotes, into three classes. Talk about these three classes of the impossible.
Yes. When usually people say, oh, that's impossible, like, a UFO, I mean, they can't reach the Earth. Stars are too far away. Usually you're talking about a civilization maybe 100 years more advanced than us. But, open your mind to different kinds of possibilities. A class 1 impossibility, I say, is something that is impossible for 10 years, 50 years, maybe 100 years. But a class 2 impossibility, open your mind to the possibility that a civilization may be thousands of years, millions of years ahead of us, in which case interstellar travel is not such a big deal for them. But, of course, there are some things which are probably totally impossible. Perpetual motion machines, even though we've tried very hard to build them, so far no one has ever successfully built a machine that gives you energy from nothing.
And you can't even get a patent on a perpetual motion machine, as I understand it.
That's right. The Patent Office puts pretty strict conditions on perpetual motion machines. There have been too many swindles in the past. I'm not saying that it's totally impossible. I'm just saying that there have been so many charlatans that have swindled millions of dollars. And in fact, I list some of them in my book, Physics of the Impossible. That's where the Patent Office is gun-shy about perpetual motion machines.
Talking about the U.S. government, it's an adage almost in the conspiracy world that the U.S. government's black science projects or hidden science projects are at least 10 years and maybe as much as 25 years in advance of what is seen in the open literature. How advanced do you think we are in our deepest secret world?
Well, it's really no accident that invisibility research, which is just hitting the headlines now, is funded by the United States Pentagon. I mean, if you think about it, it's actually quite natural that they would fund the leading work on invisibility. When I teach optics at the university, I used to tell my students that invisibility was impossible. It violated the laws of physics. I wrote down the laws of physics on a blackboard and he said, see, look, invisibility is impossible. Well, I was wrong. And so was every single physics textbook on the planet Earth. All the textbooks are being revised now because 2 years ago at Duke University, under microwave radiation, they actually showed that light, electromagnetic light, can wrap around an object so that it becomes invisible. Think of a boulder. You put a boulder in a river. Downstream from the boulder, you don't know there's a boulder upstream because water wraps around the boulder. Same thing for microwave radiation. And just a few months ago, as the book was going to press at Caltech, the University of Karlsruhe in Germany, and the Ames Laboratory in Iowa, they were able to make red light and green light bend in a way consistent with invisibility. This is amazing. I mean, think about it. Within 10 years, we may be able to make an object invisible to a single color. Within a few decades, perhaps to all three primary colors. And after that, Harry Potter, watch out.
Right, exactly. That's one of the things I loved about the book is your use of not only the science fiction world, but also the world of films. People can relate to this stuff because they see it in the films.
That's right. And, a lot of people come up to me and say, well, beam me up, Scotty.
Right.
That's not possible.
Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, we have already teleported individual particles of light called photons. The world's record, by the way, is 600 meters. We teleported light 600 meters across the Danube River. And beryllium atoms now, cesium atoms have been teleported. Within 10 years, I suspect the first molecule, maybe water, will be teleported. Within a few decades, maybe the first DNA, maybe the first virus. And after that, well, Captain Kirk is more difficult because he's quite large, 10 trillion cells. But, Star Trek takes place in the 23rd century. That gives us enough time to be able to teleport him.
Yeah, going back to what we were talking about a moment ago, Earth is no longer and hasn't been the center of the solar system for a long time. The solar system, we know, is not the center of the Milky Way any longer, and the Milky Way is not the center of the universe, nor is the universe the center of possibly our multiverse. What is happening to human consciousness at this time?
Yeah, it used to be that only mystics and charlatans would talk about other worlds, unseen worlds. But now this is front and center the discussion within theoretical physics. I work in something called string theory,
Mm-hmm.
and I still remember for years and years other scientists would snicker at us because, these strings vibrate in a higher dimension. And so people would come up to me and say, well, beam me up, Scotty. Where are these higher dimensions? Sounds like the Twilight Zone for me. Well, they're not laughing anymore. If you've been reading the New York Times, Science Magazine, Discover Magazine, all of them have been devoting lots of ink to string theory, which exists in 10 or 11-dimensional hyperspace. So things that were once considered unbelievably far-fetched are now pretty much taken for granted. Every university in the world teaches this now.
Incredible. Dr. Kaku, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to ask you, everyone needs a symbol for the impossible, right? And what if everyone's working on an impossible idea? I'd like to know what other impossible ideas you're working on.
Okay.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Dr. Michio Kaku, the author of Physics of the Impossible, a scientific exploration into the world of phasers, force fields, teleportation, and time travel. Dr. Kaku, we have crossed a line between old and new humanity. Talk about what all of this means for us on an individual level.
In my book, I even talk about bigger vistas than just invisibility, teleportation, or ray guns. We're entering a new era in terms of scanning outer space. Two developments. First of all, this year, the Kepler satellite goes up in orbit that will detect Earth-like twins of the Earth in outer space. We're going to have an existential shock later this year, looking up at the night sky and realizing that our satellites are sensitive enough now to begin to detect tiny Earth-like twins of our Earth orbiting another star in a familiar constellation in the night sky. Now, that's not enough. Get this now. One of the founders of Microsoft, Paul Allen, a billionaire, has given about $30 million to fund a series of radio telescopes that will scan for intelligent signals from aliens from outer space. This is the stuff of science fiction, and now Microsoft billionaire is funding it.
Right. Incredible. So about that impossible idea, what is a symbol of the impossible for you, and what's an impossible idea that you're working on now?
Well, many people think that time travel is way out there. But, believe it or not, we have a theory of time travel. Even Einstein knew this. The first time travel solution was found in 1949 of Einstein's equations at Princeton. Einstein was flabbergasted. He never realized that his own theory could allow loopholes. Einstein thought that time was like a river that meanders, speeds up, and slows down around stars. And we measure that all the time with our satellites, by the way. That's the correct picture. Time is a river. Mm-hmm. But the new wrinkle is that the river of time has whirlpools.
I love that.
The river of time. It also can fork to two separate rivers. And so now all of a sudden, all bets are off. All of a sudden, we physicists now are writing papers about how, an advanced civilization with enough energy, but how an advanced civilization may be able to tie time into knots and perhaps, bend space into a pretzel. So this is now fair game for young enterprising physicists to write blueprints for imaginary time machines.
And you also tie that in with a quote from Max Tegmark of MIT, who believes that in 50 years the existence of parallel universes will be no more controversial than the existence of other galaxies then called island universes was 100 years ago.
That's right. Our next generation of satellites, in 2014, LISA goes up in orbit. It's a laser satellite. That's what the L stands for. And it's a laser satellite that will detect echoes from Genesis. The Big Bang was so shocking that shock waves are still reverberating around the universe today. We have baby pictures of the Big Bang, by the way. Baby pictures taken in microwave radiation. They're published on the web, by the way. You can see actually baby pictures of the infinite universe. But now with laser satellites, we can now detect the instant of the Big Bang and radiation from before Genesis. This is shocking. We now have the possibility of actually measuring radiation from before the Big Bang. Perhaps our universe has an umbilical cord connecting it to a parent universe.
Wow.
Perhaps it came out of nothing. We'll find out after 2014. when we launch a new generation of what are called gravity wave detectors, and that's going to change everything.
And what about even sooner than that, the experiment at CERN at the Large Hadron Collider where they're recreating the conditions that existed just after the Big Bang?
That's right. In May of this year, the Large Hadron Collider gets turned on. That's our machine. That's our baby. It's the biggest machine of science ever created in the history of the human race, 17 miles in circumference. It's so big you could put the city of Geneva inside the machine. That's how big it is. And we hope to recreate some of the conditions of Genesis itself. Now, some people ask, well, is it dangerous? Actually, not so dangerous because the particles that it will produce hit the Earth all the time from outer space. Mm-hmm. And the Earth is perfectly fine. And Mother Nature creates atom smashers that are much more powerful than our atom smasher to be based in Geneva. But we're interested because it may prove the existence of string theory. String theory says that everything vibrates. Everything is vibrating, but there are different octaves. We are the lowest set of vibrations. Tables, chairs, atoms, we're the lowest set. But, string theory says there are higher vibrations. And we hope to detect these higher vibrations at the Large Hadron Collider. And that could really seal the deal, I think.
Well, it's very interesting timing because the Maya, so many people are interested in the Maya 2012 prophecies and the end of the world and all of this, that the Maya speak of a serpent rope emerging from the center of our galaxy in 2012, and they describe an enlightened being or a group of enlightened beings who are said to ride upon this rope. And some Maya cosmologists look at this and say, well, maybe we can take out the archaic Mayan term serpent rope and put in the modern word wormhole, and we have an appropriate interpretation of this thought. Maybe what if it's a space elevator, or what if this thing is string theory itself, and here comes this enlightened consciousness indeed riding in upon a string.
Right, and also you mentioned the space elevator. I mentioned that in my book, Physics of the Impossible. Mm-hmm. Carbon nanotubes are tiny little strings. Mm-hmm. They are the strongest substance known to science, stronger than steel. And it was Arthur C. Clarke, who just passed away, who first introduced the people of the world to a space elevator. If you take a ball on a string and you twirl it, the ball does not fall because of centrifugal force. In the same way, if you take a ball on a string, connect the string to the Earth, and hurl the ball into space, it will not fall. It'll spin along with the Earth, suspended in midair by centrifugal force, just like the Indian rope trick. And just like Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack climbed up the beanstalk into heaven. And that's a space elevator. And carbon nanotubes are strong enough to sustain the tension of a space elevator.
Getting back to this Maya thought, let's suppose there was a Type 2 or a Type 3 civilization that did emerge out of a wormhole in 2012. Would we know it? Would we be able to detect them? Or how could that transpire?
Okay, well, as your listeners may know, we scientists rank civilization to three types. Type 1 is planetary. Type 2 has mastered the power of a star. Type 3 plays with galaxies. We're about 100 years from being Type 1. Mm-hmm. A Type 1 civilization can manipulate the weather. They can play with volcanoes, play with earthquakes, things that we can't even imagine for another 100 years. And then Type 2 can play with stars, like in Star Trek and those TV programs. And Type 3 is like the Empire of The Empire Strikes Back of Star Wars. Now, we physicists are almost convinced they're out there. In fact, a Type 2 civilization is immortal. Nothing known to science can destroy a Type 2. An earthquake they can control, meteors, comets they can simply bat, and also even the death of their sun. They can even survive the death of their sun because they've mastered the power of a star. So we do believe they're out there. And one day, if we actually encounter one, you can forget about thinking about just like flying saucers and stuff like that. We're talking about an intelligence far beyond things that we can even imagine, civilizations that are thousands, maybe millions of years ahead of us, And so that, for me, that's really awe-inspiring, that the universe may actually have civilizations that we can only even begin to dream about.
Well, it doesn't matter hardly which ancient civilization you look into their text, especially the Egyptians. They're very clear that their civilization, their culture was created by light beings that came from the stars. Would a Type 2 civilization, by definition, be a group of light beings?
Well, a type 2 civilization by definition can play with stars. However, you mentioned the Egyptians. I was at the pyramids just a few years ago speaking at the Einstein Centennial in Alexandria. And, the orientation of the three pyramids, as your listener knows, corresponds to the stars in the belt of Orion. Osiris was their god of the dead. We call it Orion today. And the pyramids are the three stars, basically. So basically, they worship the stars, and they oriented the pyramids according to their constellation in the sky, Osiris. For example, the Nile River corresponds to the Milky Way galaxy.
Right.
Betelgeuse and the other stars in the constellation correspond to minor pyramids. So they were very well aware of the orientation of the stars. The pyramids, we think, were oriented to become basically a launching pad for the soul of the pharaoh to launch him in the direction of the constellation Orion.
Absolutely. Speaking of Osiris, I'm a specialist in one of his temples, which is in Abydos in Upper Egypt. And in that temple, in the Osiris Chapel, they show a device. It's called the Osiris device. They refer to it as the tower, the ladder to heaven. And you cannot believe what you see on this wall. You see this instrument with a ship mounted to it that's labeled the Ship of Eternity, the Ark of the Millions of Years, and the diagram of that ship precisely, identically matches the way Stephen Hawking in his books shows a wormhole. How can that be?
Well, it's amazing, right? If you read Alice in Wonderland, that's when the public first became aware of a wormhole. It's the looking glass. It's the looking glass of Alice. It's not a rocket ship. It's not a flying saucer.
Right.
It's a looking glass, so that if you put your hand through the looking glass, it winds up on the other side of forever. Now, this, we think, could be the model for a black hole even. We think of black holes as being tiny dots of enormous gravity, but actually they're spinning. We photographed several thousand already. They're spinning very rapidly, and they collapse not to a dot, but to a ring. A ring of neutrons spinning very rapidly, kept afloat by centrifugal force. That's why it doesn't collapse. And if you put your hand through the ring, your hand goes through the looking glass, and it winds up on another universe. This was first discovered in 1963 by mathematician Roy Kerr of New Zealand, and he realized that every time you pass through the portal, through the wormhole, you wind up on another floor like of an elevator. Think of an apartment with many parallel floors. Each floor is a universe. And you hit the up button, and you keep on going through this gateway. Now, there is a catch. The catch is that there's an up button, but there's no down button. The black holes you go through, but you can't come back. But in the 1980s at Caltech now, Kip Thorne and his colleagues found a transversable wormhole. And that shocked the physics community.
Sure.
We thought that these wormholes were cute, they were interesting, just like in Twilight Zone, but they were useless because you can't come back from the wormhole, you see? Then in the 80s at Caltech, Kip Thorne and his colleagues found a transversable wormhole. You can go back and forth between them. And all of a sudden, everyone began to jump into this game of trying to find more and more solutions that, to be quite frank, correspond to things you see on Twilight Zone.
Absolutely. And then, of course, Carl Sagan's novel and the incredible film Contact picked up that idea and made it virtually a new gospel for many people who follow wormhole theory and the possibility that humankind might be in the process of transforming itself into these awakened beings. Incredible.
Yeah, so in other words, we don't necessarily have to have a clunky starship. We don't necessarily have to, put in the gas into the engine in order to get from star to star.
Right.
We may simply walk through a doorway.
Absolutely. Dr. Kaku, we're up against another break. When we come back, let's continue talking about teleportation and gateways. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Dr. Michio Kaku, author of Physics of the Impossible. Visit his website, mkaku.org. That's mkaku.org. Michio, in the book, you mentioned that the earliest example of teleportation is in the Bible.
That's right. I was kind of shocked, but in Acts, you can actually look up a sequence where, angels basically allow a person to disappear, and then he reappears someplace else instantly. And that is the first recorded instance of teleportation.
Incredible.
And if you saw the movie Jumper, by the way, you realize the power that you could have if you could jump into a bank, jump into the headquarters of an enemy, jump anywhere you want.
Yeah, that movie Jumper kind of puzzled me. I woke up the next morning after watching it thinking, you know what, that's a message. It's saying if you start displaying these abilities, the U.S. government's going to come kill you.
Well, that's a problem. In the book I also talk about telepathy, and we physicists are now actually making inroads on it. But of course, if you really are a master of telepathy, then the mafia would want to kill you or kidnap you. The CIA would want to get a hold of you. But we're definitely making, real progress in these directions. Let me say real quick to tantalize your audience about the book. We can take a stroke victim, somebody who's paralyzed and cannot talk to his parents anymore, and everyone's crying because they're paralyzed. We can put a chip on top of their brain, connect the chip to a laptop, and train him to move the cursor so that he can play video games. He can answer emails. This is incredible. Think about it. A paralyzed person sealed off from the world by telepathy, actually by electricity, actually communicating via a computer.
In any other age, that would be considered a miracle.
To be considered magic.
So how do the impossible and the miraculous correspond?
Well, we scientists believe that at first things are, quote, miraculous. They appear as magic. Mm-hmm. They appear as works of science fiction. But then we scientists say, well, hey, wait a minute. If we're ingenious enough, we'll find a way to make it happen. And then it just becomes an engineering problem. So in my book, Physics of the Impossible, I have to differentiate between what is really impossible and engineering problems. If you simply throw enough money, throw enough resources, you can begin the process of perhaps reading minds, of making objects disappear. They're not out of the question. They are within the laws of physics.
And on this miraculous question, again, physicist Frank Tipler once observed that the central problem with contemporary theology, and indeed most of the late 20th century religion, is not that it's separated from science, but that it is separated from modern contemporary science. And he says that theological research in the 21st century will require a PhD in particle physics.
Well, maybe. Frank's a friend of mine, and I do have a PhD in particle physics. But I would hope that in the future everybody has access to this wondrous, fantastic stuff coming out of the laboratory. And that's why I wrote the book Physics of the Impossible, so that kids, housewives, Boy Scout troop leaders, anyone can really share in the marvel that we feel. And just like Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
By the way, did you ever watch the cartoon Jimmy Neutron?
Once in a while I watched it, yeah. When my kids were young, I used to watch it with them.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing stuff, that what they're showing kids is possible, and putting forward these kind of inspirational role models.
Yeah, we're born scientists. We're born to wonder, what does it all mean? Where does it come from? Are there other aliens in the universe? We're born that way. But then we hit junior high school and high school, and it's crushed out of us. That inquisitiveness is really crushed out of us by the time we're in high school. And then after that, we, quote, grow up. And when we grow up, we cease to dream. We cease to think about these things. Well, we scientists have never grown up. We scientists still imagine the thrill of when we were kids learning about these things. And now, of course, we can build these things in the laboratory.
Well, and I was so intrigued and just entertained, really, if you don't mind me saying, about your story as a young man, as a boy, being inspired by Einstein and building a metaphorical wormhole that led you right to Harvard. Talk, if you would, just for a moment about how ideas like Flash Gordon and some of the other sci-fi TV shows and comic strips of the 40s and 50s inspired you.
Okay, well, I had two role models growing up. My parents were in a relocation camp, as you mentioned. They were very poor. And after the war, I realized that if I was going to amount to anything at all, I would have to do it myself. My parents were very poor. They were not educated. They just got out of a concentration camp. So I had two role models. First, as you mentioned, when I was a child, everyone was talking about it. Everyone was talking about that a great scientist had just died. That was Albert Einstein. It hit the front page of every newspaper, and they published a picture of his desk. And on the desk was this unfinished manuscript. And I thought to myself, this is an adventure story. I want to know what was in that manuscript that the greatest scientist of my time could not finish. Mm-hmm. I wanted to help finish it. Well, now we know that that manuscript was his unfinished unified field theory that would allow us to, quote, read the mind of God. That was his dream, an equation 1 inch long, which would summarize all physical laws and allow him to, quote, read God's thoughts. But as you also mentioned, I used to watch Flash Gordon on the TV, and I realized very early in life, hey, look, I don't got blonde hair, I don't got the muscles. I mean, I can't be Flash. But I was fascinated by the character of Dr. Zarkov. He was a man by the sheer force of intellect, just because of his brains. He could build a starship. He could build ray guns. Yeah. He built the city in the sky. And I said to myself, wow, that's for me. And so when I was in high school, I built an atom smasher. I freaked out my mother when I asked her if I can build a 2.3 million electron volt Betatron in the garage.
Right.
But because of that, I got the attention of Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb, and he arranged for me to get a scholarship to Harvard, that wormhole that you mentioned that shot me to Harvard.
Right.
And then I could begin to fulfill the dreams that I had. Now, of course, Edward Teller wanted me to work on hydrogen bombs. He offered me a job designing warheads. But I told him that I'd rather work on something even bigger, and that is Genesis, the Big Bang itself.
Well, and that is such an inspiring aspect of your story, because the superheroes you mentioned, the blonde Flash Gordon, many of those superheroes were in response to the Nazi idea of the superhuman. And the Nazis, everyone believed, had a super science, and they were building all these and were mythic figures that were going to create a master race. And you turned away from that and have now inspired a whole new generation of people to stay true to what's in their heart and to explore the true secrets of the universe and not just gain acclaim building more weapons of mass destruction.
That's right. Science should be liberating. Not only should it be fun and interesting, but it should also give us freedom and prosperity. So I look at science as like the engine of prosperity. It's the thing that gives us all the plenty on our dinner table. It's what gives us all the gadgets in our living room. It exposes us to the world via the Internet, and it gives us telescopes and satellites by which we can probe the stars. So I think science is very liberating, and it should be taught that way.
Yeah, on this line that you mentioned Einstein, I've read Hyperspace and also Parallel Worlds as well as Visions, and I don't think you mentioned Nikola Tesla.
You know, we physicists wanted to make sure that Tesla's name would live forever. We know he was cheated out of so many patents. We know that he was not given the credit because, of course, he bumped up against Thomas Edison.
Right.
So we named the unit of magnetism after Tesla. His name is going to live forever. The unit of magnetism, 1 Tesla, is 10,000 Gauss. That's what you get on an MRI scan. If you get an MRI scan, you are exposed to 1 Tesla of magnetism. So we want to make sure that his name will live forever.
Did you happen to see the movie The Prestige where David Bowie plays Nikola Tesla?
No, I haven't seen the movie. However, I was in a documentary which went into his life.
Yeah. No, just briefly, Tesla builds a transporter device for a magician who's in competition with another magician. He basically makes a copy of the person. It's an extraordinary performance and a very thought-provoking premise as well. Impossible, I'm sure.
Yeah, what the problem with Tesla was that he didn't have lawyers, and so when RCA and the big electronics companies realized that Tesla was sitting on these patents for a gold mine of radio inventions, they had lawyers basically whittle away at all the patents he controlled. And unfortunately, toward the end of his life, he did develop OCD. He began to be fixated on the number 3. He became very eccentric. He lived in the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan, for example, and wouldn't eat his food unless he was convinced that it wasn't being poisoned. So it was very easy for RCA and big companies with their big fancy lawyers to outwit this man who was unfortunately beginning to have OCD toward the end of his life. And that's why he's not given proper credit, which is very sad.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, when you look into his story and you think about the possibility that we could have had wireless transmission of power, wireless radio, Internet back almost 100 years ago, it's astonishing.
Yeah, and the most famous battle, of course, is the battle of currents. Edison wanted DC to wire up Manhattan, and Tesla said, no, AC is what conserves energy and is more efficient. Everyone uses AC. So that's the living testament of Tesla's idea. Nobody uses DC anymore. Everyone uses AC in their homes.
That's right. Dr. Kaku, we're up against another break. When we come back, I want to ask you about some of the huge trends that are moving through our world right now, and the basis that bringing forward the basic secrets of the universe and the impact that will have on our culture and civilization. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're talking with Dr. Michio Kaku, author of Physics of the Impossible. Get over to his website, mkaku.org, and read his articles. Listen to his interviews on his radio program. It's the best information in the world right now. Michio, every time you turn around these days, people have a computer strapped to their body. It's as if there's a transformation of our body from offline organic beings to online semi-digital, or, as you're proposing here, other dimensional beings. How are we doing in terms of making this transition, and what's going to really begin to anchor it into the human consciousness for the average person?
Well, just remember that if you have a PC on your desk, you're almost like a slave to the PC. You have to rearrange everything around the PC. In the future, the PC will disappear. Chips will be about a penny a piece by 2020, and they'll be distributed by the billions in the walls, electricity, in our chair, furniture, and the word computer will actually disappear from the English language.
Wow.
No one uses the word electricity anymore, and yet electricity is everywhere and nowhere. It's in the walls. You assume that there's a light switch when you walk into the room. In the future, you will assume that there's an internet portal in a room when you walk into it. You'll assume that the walls are intelligent. And your internet, the future of the internet, is going to be a magic mirror. They'll say, mirror, mirror on the wall to your wall screen or your wristwatch. A face will emerge, perhaps. You'll talk to that face. That's the future of the internet, almost like a fairy tale, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
And it's all brought to us by nanotechnology.
That's right. Nanotechnology is making this possible because we're going to have chips that only cost a penny and will be scattered in our environment. Your glasses, for example, will not only have the internet in it, not only will it be your entertainment center, but it will also recognize people's faces. When you bump into people and recognize objects or see objects you don't recognize, your glasses will recognize them and help you to remember people's faces. And so this technology is coming because of nanotechnology. We're going to be able to create objects that are tinier and tinier and tinier.
It's something else. Speaking of tiny, 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 the quantum realm. The quantum is a word that you hear on everything. There's practically quantum milk. Talk about the quantum revolution and which side of the argument you're on. Is it going to be the quantum realm that's going to come in, or what's going to happen?
Well, first of all, the world is definitely a quantum world. The laser beam, the internet, electronics, atoms, all of that are byproducts of the quantum theory. But the philosophical implications of the quantum theory are so strange, so bizarre, that it really borders on the twilight zone. For example, when you're in high school, you learn about chemistry, and you draw these little footballs around the nucleus of the atom, and you begin to connect them to call them molecules, right? Well, electrons are not footballs, but you draw these little footballs connecting oxygen, hydrogen, stuff like that. Everyone has to do that in high school. So what is the football? The football is the electron being many places simultaneously at the same time. Now, how come we didn't teach you this? Because it would have upset you in high school. High school kids would be really upset if they knew at the quantum level you could be two places at the same time. You could disappear, reappear someplace else, but that's called a molecule. That's why we have footballs that combine oxygen to hydrogen to give us H2O, right? And so the implications of this are staggering if you think about it. See, everything vibrates, right? But this means that other things can vibrate at different frequencies, and they have decohered from us. We're no longer vibrating in unison, which means that the world could be continually branching off in different directions, each universe vibrating at a different frequency so we don't interact with it anymore. This means that in some sense, Elvis Presley is still alive.
Right.
Now, that may shock some people when I say it. People might say, oh, my God, get him to the loony farm, right?
Well, he was here in Nashville yesterday, so.
Right. Somebody spotted him.
Right.
But actually, we have to take it very seriously. I have my friends some of them Nobel laureates, who ask this question: are there universes where Elvis is still alive? The answer could very well be yes, except that we have decohered from them. We're no longer vibrating in unison with them.
When I first started writing, I wrote a book called Junior Cosmic Egg, the story of a cosmic egg named Junior who grows up to become his own universe. And it was kind of an attempt to want to inspire kids to really get this idea that, wait a minute, our imagination is really limitless. Do you believe that?
Well, believe it or not, I have friends of mine. One friend may eventually win the Nobel Prize. He has stated that baby universes may actually be possible, that we may actually one day be gods. Mm-hmm. And create a baby universe. Now, of course, he is a physicist at MIT. He's very careful to say that you would have to be very advanced to do this. But there's no law of physics that says you cannot be a god in some sense and concentrate enough energy at one point to create a baby universe.
Well, and see, that's the thing. You mentioned that about the person wanting to be very cautious, and that's understandable. In our line here, we're always talking with cutting-edge scientists and that, and then when you get them aside and you ask them what they really think is possible, it's incredible the potential that we have at our fingertips at this moment.
Right. See, that's why I wrote the book, Physics of the Impossible, to tell people that some things are possible within 50, 70, 100 years. Many things we'll see in our lifetime. Other things will require 1,000 years, several thousand years to master, but they are possible. Maybe not for us, but for aliens in outer space, maybe our descendants will be able to master this technology. So I tell my friends that if somebody knocks on your door and claims to be your great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter, a future granddaughter, and she came backwards in time to meet her illustrious ancestor, don't slam the door.
Right.
It's possible that our future progeny may one day have the ability to play with these technologies and visit you and knock on your door.
So which of these impossible inventions that you describe or ideas do you think will be created first?
Well, invisibility is very close now.
Right.
Okay. And also telepathy. Even with a simple MRI scan now, we're beginning to read people's thoughts. Lie detectors, for example, can now be based on MRI that scans your brain. It takes more energy to tell a lie than it does to tell the truth. Mm-hmm. You can pick that up on a brain scan. You can see more neural activity when you tell a lie. And this year, by the way, is going to go to court. One insurance company denied a claim to one individual. The insurance company said, you set your office on fire. We're not going to pay for fire insurance.
Wow.
And the guy said, wait a minute. I did not set my office afire. I'm going to sue you and prove it. Prove that I'm right by having my own brain scanned. So it's going to go to court this year.
Wow.
Eventually, we may even have like a dictionary of thought. Different emotions, different thought patterns can be shown to correspond to different patterns on an MRI scan. And so even telepathy cannot be ruled out. And invisibility, as I said, we're making very fast progress on invisibility now in the laboratory, compliments of the United States Pentagon.
Mm-hmm. Now, along with the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, they're building something they call the grid, which is this enormous, which is the next generation Internet. I think it's possible that we could actually be looking at an artificially intelligent world here in the next 25 to 50 years?
Well, it is a favorite theme of science fiction that you create a computer so big, one day it becomes conscious and it says, I think, and then it takes over. That's the theme of the Terminator series, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, that our early defense system deliberately sets off a nuclear war because it says humans are too puny, I'm intelligent, so on and so forth. However, I have to stress the fact that artificial intelligence theory is very primitive. We don't know what consciousness is. After all these years of debating what is consciousness, we still don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. We still can't define it, and we still cannot make a machine that is aware of itself. And we're kind of clueless at that point. The military would like to create a robot soldier, but hey, our most advanced robots have the intelligence of an insect. So that's one area where we're actually not so advanced. We're actually not so advanced in the realm of artificial intelligence. We'll probably have invisibility. We'll probably have certain forms of telepathy way before we have a sentient robot.
Yeah, and of course it will be the military that's driving this. So is there any possible or impossible invention that you would like to see not invented?
Well, the military has been has funded something through something called DARPA. Mm-hmm. DARPA is the agency that pioneered something called the Internet.
Right.
It used to be called ARPANET, and they wanted to fight a nuclear war. But there's some irony there. The Internet was originally designed to fight a nuclear war and to be male, to be dominant, to control cities and munitions via the Internet. The irony is that the Internet today is female. It's about touching people.
Ah, interesting.
Most of the people on the Internet are women now. And so here was this intensely male-dominant object that now has flipped into something that is basically female. And so I think that's very interesting.
That is incredible. Very interesting.
Yeah, and also another thing, GPS. The GPS system was originally designed by physicists like me to fight a nuclear war because we wanted to place warheads right on top of the Kremlin. And to do that, you had to have missiles that are accurate to within 10 feet over a distance of 8,000 miles, right? But today, who uses the Internet? Everybody. The GPS system, taxi cab drivers, parents track their children on the Internet in Japan now.
Right.
Everybody uses the GPS.
Absolutely.
So there's an irony there. A war-fighting device becomes something for peace.
We've only got a few minutes left, and I want to just ask you kind of a hypothetical question here. Steven Spielberg is working on a new film, his next major film. It's called Interstellar. It's about wormholes.
Right.
You've probably seen all the movies about wormholes. What would you like to see in a film that would really make it real?
Gee, well, Hollywood is so good at special effects. I remember when Stargate came out. That had some pretty good special effects, I must admit. Of course, no one's ever constructed a wormhole. It would take an advanced civilization to do that. But I must congratulate the special effects people. They make wormholes pretty realistic.
You must get contacted all the time by Hollywood, huh?
Yeah, a lot of script writers do kind of like ask me. But, however, I kind of like warn them that sometimes the physicists can know so much that it gets kind of boring. That is, the special effects don't have lights and things blipping and, make your heart pound. Sometimes if you tell them the real design for something, it doesn't look flashy. So sometimes it's better to let the Hollywood scriptwriters run with it.
Right. I wanted to talk for a quick moment about one of the inspirational quotes or one of the guiding quotes of your life from Albert Einstein, who said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science."
That's right. And he also said that imagination is more important than knowledge.
Incredible. Well, Dr. Kaku, it has been our pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Oh, no problem. Anytime.
The book is The Physics of the Impossible, a scientific exploration into the world of phasers, force fields, teleportation, and time travel. We'll look forward to talking with you again soon, Dr. Kaku.
Okay.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe.
This week, our Emmy Award-winning science reporter, EarthFiles.com's Linda Moulton Howe, goes back to drones country. There's been a lot of controversy on the Internet about the drones. Could something as weird-looking as that possibly be real? How could it stay in the air? Whose is it? And what extraordinarily clear photographs. This must be CGI of some sort, but Linda Moulton Howe, and Linda alone, has found eyewitnesses from all over this country over a period of years who have seen these objects and provided us with credible witness reports, plus in some cases their identified names and addresses. The drones are out there. They are real, and they are back. Here she is from Albuquerque, New Mexico, EarthFiles.com's Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. I am up to at least 14 eyewitnesses spanning 21 years of an aerial craft that is generally quiet, silent, or makes a low electrostatic hum and seems to move like a dragonfly. A year ago, on May 11th, 2007, Coast to Coast AM webmaster Lex received an email with several images of this odd dragonfly-shaped aerial object from a Central California resident who called himself Chad. The images were dated May 6th, 2007. In addition to the dragonfly-shaped body that had appendages sticking out from a large ring, rising straight up into the air from the ring were slightly curved, thin wires that formed a tall circular crown above the dragonfly body. Other 2007 photographs of dragonfly-shaped aerial objects began to emerge, between May and June from Lake Tahoe, Capitola, and Big Basin, California, all with appendages sticking out from a ring and these tall, thin wires extending high above. After the June 5th Big Basin craft, no other 2007 photographs of the mysterious dragonfly-shaped drones emerged, and none of us knew until spring 2008 that two other eyewitnesses further north in Camas, Washington, on the Columbia River between Washington and Oregon, were encountering yet another craft moving like a dragonfly above Lacamas Lake on June 7th, 2007. Those two eyewitnesses are good friends. After a year of silence, one has agreed to speak on the record with his full name, Brent Urow, a 48-year-old professional artist who specializes in airbrushing cars, motorcycles, and blue jeans. Even though Brent was born and raised in the Vancouver, Washington region as a strict Catholic, he has not been as upset as his friend Tim by their encounter with an unearthly-looking aerial craft. Tim is a Christian fundamentalist who does not accept there is other intelligent life beyond Earth, and he is not willing to comment. Brent Urow is a single parent with two sons. In the late afternoon of Thursday, June 7th, 2007, Brent dropped one of his sons downtown in Camas and was returning home up the big hill that goes toward Lacamas Lake. He heard sirens and could see behind him the blue flashing lights of two police cars speeding up the hill. Brent pulled over as the police went by. After that came more emergency rescue vehicles, a fire truck, and another police car. Brent worried there had been a big wreck up ahead, and he thought of his good friend Tim, who lived up the road. When Brent reached Tim's house, he was relieved that all was quiet, but he was surprised again when more Camas City police and Clark County officers sped by. Brent Urow drove to an open space overlooking Lacamas Lake to see if there was a wreck on Ledbetter, which is a curvy road that follows the lake. He could not see anything on the road, but coming toward him in the sky was something that he had never seen before.
And I saw what I thought was a logging helicopter, a really small-framed helicopter, like a wire-framed helicopter, coming down what we call Lacamas Valley, down along Lacamas Creek. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. And I started hearing the static sound, and I thought it was my radio, and I pushed a button on my stereo, and I just realized that it was on CD, and it was the CD playing, and I'm going, well, what's that, So I thought that maybe I'd run over a branch or something when I was dragging a branch. This is kind of what it sounded like, So I rolled down my window, and I was slowing down. I rolled down the passenger window, and it sounded like it was coming out of the passenger window, and I could hear the wind, going over my sunroof and stuff. So as I'm slowing down, it seemed like it was getting louder. It's still making this sound, and it's getting louder and louder and louder. And I'm going, what the heck? And I looked to my left, which is just about, probably, a couple 100 feet, maybe 300 feet over the water where I'm at on the road. Mm-hmm. And I saw what I thought was that helicopter thing. As I'm slowing way down, it's still making this sound, and it's getting louder and louder and louder. And I'm going, what the heck? And I saw what I thought was that helicopter thing. What the heck? Mm-hmm. I'm getting ready to jump out and see if there's a branch or something stuck under my car, and I realized that the sound is coming from this thing, okay? And I'm looking at it. My first thing was I'm looking for some sort of a propulsion system. I'm looking for a propeller, and I know that there was, there's a ring, okay? So, and I know I could see light to this ring. I was kind of it was at a side angle, but I couldn't hear anything that sounded like a turbine engine or, an internal combustion engine or a steam engine or anything for that matter, and I'm real mechanical and that kind of stuff, and I know what that stuff sounds like, and I'm going, that is so weird. And I'm looking at this thing, and it's not like anything I've ever seen in my life, okay? And I'm just in awe. And I'm sitting there, and I got a really nice Olympus camera in my glove box, and I'm in so much shock over this thing that I didn't even think about it. I'm just like sitting there, and I'm looking around to see if there's anybody else, because I live in a fairly rural area, but a lot of people jog and bicycle and stuff by the lake, and I didn't see a soul, and I'm thinking, oh my word, here I am having a close encounter, and there isn't anybody around, this is crazy, and I'm sitting here looking at this thing, and it just kind of like, it hovered, and as it was coming down, I noticed when it was coming down, when I saw it through the trees, when it was coming up the hill, it was moving back and forth like in an erratic motion, like it was looking for something, you know what I mean? Like a helicopter going back and forth looking for something. But I could see it like rotated like a helicopter would, kind of, so it was staying stationary, but the body of it was twisting or something, and I'm going, what the heck? As I'm looking at this thing, it's really, really loud, and it made a static sound, okay? It sounded like electricity or something, what a Jacob's ladder is, where it goes zzz, or the static on a television late at night, except for exaggerated, really loud.
And Brent, what is there where it seemed to be looking?
I don't know. It was over the lake, but it wasn't a helicopter. There was no blades on it. There was no props, and it had a nose on it, okay? And it had what, to me, it looked like more of a, I understand how airplanes work and stuff, a wing. There wasn't anything that you would resemble a wing in any way, shape, or form. The nose maybe, perhaps, resembled a wing, but there wasn't a leading edge on it. It was all the same width, it was weird.
When you say nose, what do you mean nose?
When I say nose, it had a different thing on the front. The front of it, it was a different appendage than the other ones. The other ones looked like spikes or spears, or something like that.
So how is this nose different?
It was long and it was flat. I know that for sure. It was long and it was flatter. The other appendages seemed to be bulkier for some reason. It was an obvious ring, okay? It did have appendages that I could see for sure. One longer one in the front, and it had one coming out towards me because I could see the end of it. And where they joined the body at, it looked like there was like couplers or something. Like it looked like almost like a transformer to me, with the wire structure, with couplers everywhere where there was, like the thing that went out the front. It seemed like there was a coupler in it. And one of the things that went through my head was that the thing was hurt or that it was injured or there was something, it was malfunctioning is what I felt like because of the way it was twitching and stuff. And I started to smell something. It smelled like ozone. I don't know if you know what ozone smells like, but like a burnt circuit board or something like that. And this thing is making this ungodly noise, and it seemed like forever. And I'm sitting there, and I looked around again, and there's still no cars, no nothing. And I'm thinking, this is so weird.
And twitching, what do you mean?
Like almost every time it made all the static sound, it would shudder or something. It sat there, but it was almost like the static was so loud, and it was like it was a part of it. I couldn't see any thrusters going down. I was looking for a propeller in the middle of the thing is what I was thinking.
Right.
Because, I play with radio-controlled stuff. I got a nice radio-controlled truck and stuff like that. And I didn't see anything like that. And the noise that it made was what got me the worst, It looked like the appendage that was facing me, which would have been the right side of it, rotated. It looked like the appendages rotated, and the ring stayed still almost. And they rotated to the left, went directly away from me, and then I could see an appendage sticking out the rear, and it went like zip, zip, and it was gone. It went straight, like I could see, like right up to the Columbia River Gorge, right up towards Mount Hood and Bonneville Dam. Boom. It wasn't very thick, you know what I mean? It was like thin. I'm sure everybody's calling them drones because they're so small. There wasn't enough structure there to house anyone, a person, unless they were very, very, very small people, because there was no pilot. So this has got to be some sort of, electrically operated, hovering off an arc or something. I don't get it,
Right.
Because I could feel like I'd smelt it, and I could hear this crackling sound. Well, this thing zipped off, and I sat there for a second, and I realized I got a camera in my glove box, and I'm going, what an idiot. Nobody's ever going to believe this. And I had a car in my garage. I was working. I don't live far from where this happened, so I drove up the road. I came in, and I was doing some airbrush work on this car, and I just grabbed my airbrush, and I have these little black boards that I just use them for make sure I got the right line on my airbrush and stuff. And I just kind of, fuzzed in a picture of it, a little circle with the appendages, and the phone rings, and it's my friend Tim, whose house that I was looking at to make sure those officers weren't going there,
Right.
And it was him on the phone, and he goes, you're not going to believe what just happened to me. And I'm like, what? He goes, I went out in the yard because all these cops went by. I said, I know, I just came up the hill. I said, where'd they all go? I said, he didn't know. But he said, I walked out in the yard to see where they were going, and I lit up a cigarette, and I'm standing there, and I seen a helicopter. I thought a helicopter coming down. I go, no way. And he goes, yeah. I go, why? And I says, Tim, I was coming up the hill when all those cops went by, and I saw the same thing you saw. Was it making any noise? He's going, oh, it was weird. It didn't sound, what I mean? He saw the exact same thing I saw. The only difference was he said he thought it had lights on it,
Right.
It was the evening, and the sun was setting and stuff, and it would have been up high enough to reflect some light, but he swears to God that he says it looked like it had two headlights on it, and it was moving back and forth. It was like looking, like snooping or something. And I'm going, really? And he goes, yeah, and then it stopped, and he goes, and it took off and went that way. He would have been closer than I was, but he was underneath of it. He was down at the lake level, and I'm, several hundred feet above him on the hill, and it was about level with me, and when it took off, it was probably closer to him than it was me, and he says that he could see air through the bottom of it, and it had the nose, the exact same thing. So he came over, and we just kind of drew it. Sit there with an airbrush, and I drew a little bit, and he tried a little bit, and I did one, kind of front on what he thought it looked like with the lights, and I was doing lightning on this car. And I'm going, I could smell ozone and stuff, and we kept talking about this crackling, and we were comparing it to electrical, popping and stuff like that, or a speaker square waving, and I go, I don't know why, but I just feel like lightning. You know what I mean? It's electricity, and I drew the lightning through it.
And on this particular object that you and Tim saw, that seems to be very similar to the drones that people were seeing in May and June of 2007.
Yeah.
What do the two of you estimate was the length of what you saw and the height of what you saw?
It wasn't very thick. It was very thin. You know what I mean? From top to bottom, it was thin, but it was long. If I was to take the ring, the top of my car would fit in it. I drive a four-door, so I would say it was probably 40 feet long. That's with the appendages included. Body-wise, I would say it's probably, the circular part of it, the ring, was probably 8, 10, maybe 12 feet across. If this thing was propelling itself with some sort of thrust or something that was keeping it up above the water where I saw it, there would have been something on the water, but the water was glass smooth.
What was the strangest part of what you're looking at?
The noise and the way it rotated, the way the thing moved, because it was really, really, mechanical. That's what got me. The eeriest thing about it, though, to be honest with you, was the fact that I couldn't explain it to myself.
And that very strange motion, the mechanical motion, is why in 2007 some people used the metaphor in the beginning. You know how dragonflies stop and start?
That's how it flew. It was like a dragonfly. That jerky motion?
Right.
Yeah, that's how it moved. You know how a dragonfly would come stop on a dime and just sit there and hover?
Right.
That's what it was like.
Right.
And I'm thinking, okay, this is not right. And that's when it did this little rotating thing. And I can't say for sure that the appendages rotated and the ring stayed still, but it sure appeared to be that way.
How high was this object over the water?
I'd say 200 feet.
So it's 200 feet above the water, and how far from you?
150 yards.
A little more than a football field away.
Yeah, but not that far. I mean, it was just right even with my window in my car.
And you and Tim estimate that it was maybe 40 feet long with all the appendages, and how thick would it be?
I'm going to have to say a foot, maybe. It's probably 2 feet thick at the most.
Really thin.
Real thin. Real thin. This thing was it looked like the appendages on the back all came together or something, and the nose rotated or whatever, and they all came together, and it looked like an arrow. There's another picture that I painted there that's, real slim, real slender, and the way the thing took off. First thing I tried to tell myself is, I asked him, I said, well, could you see, through the bottom of it? And when it went, the direction it went, it was when it was closest to him, but it was moving too fast for him to, actually see up through the thing, but he knew it was hollow, so.
How close do you think Tim was?
Well, at first, he was probably a lot further away from it from where I was when I saw it. When it stopped, He had a good, perfectly clear view of it where it stopped and rotated. He was probably, I don't know, half a mile away, and it was above the lake, and he's got a perfect dead view of the lake and stuff right there. And what it did, where it rotated at, it took it and went straight out and went back up towards the hills where it came from, basically, but it went to, it just went to the east. It went right up by the campus high school, right over the top of it, and boom, gone. So I would say Tim is probably, he was closer when it took off because it went, closer to him that way than I probably was. But in the beginning, he's probably half a mile where it rotated, but when it took off, it went right towards his house and over by the high school, which is, I would say, probably 4 blocks away from him. I tried to draw what Tim was telling me.
It looks like a broken canvas.
It's a hardboard that I use for scratch paper, basically.
And up there in the far right, it looks like everybody else's photographs of what we're calling the dragonfly drones because of the way they move.
Okay, the one at the top, that is what Tim saw. That's what he said he could see from the lake. I drew it for him. But see, he was underneath of it, okay? And what I was trying to tell him I saw was like the one with the lightning coming out of it right below that. I was on the side. He was below it.
And that's why he could see more of the appendage.
Right, and that's why he said it looked like it had more than one thing sticking out the back. Because I said when it looked like it took off, I thought those things all rotated, but it was because I was looking at it from the side. And I told him, I said, I remember it looked like it had some bent antenna on it or something, bent antennas. He's going, what do you mean? I said, well, it's got an antenna or something on the top, but I saw an antenna or something, but it looked like it was bent. maybe that's why in my mind I thought maybe the thing was, damaged or something and it was malfunctioning.
The photographs in 2007, there is this sort of crown of very tall wires that curve coming up out of the ring.
Yeah.
But you and Tim apparently didn't see this.
Well, I saw one. I thought what was one antenna on it is what I was thinking. But again, from my angle, I was looking at the side. I was looking for something that was propelling it,
Right.
I didn't care that there was a wire on the top, but I was looking for suspension wires and stuff like that. I know that I saw something on the top of it or some sort of an antenna array or something like that. That's what I thought. And that's what gave me the radio control idea. Maybe somebody's running it with a radio control and it's got a little propeller in the center. And Tim could see it from the bottom when it was doing its little rotating routine.
Right.
And he said that, no, it was hollow. There was nothing there. And I says, I know, but it doesn't make sense. It's impossible. And so we agreed at that time. We just, instead of telling anybody about it, let's just shut up. So nobody thinks we're retards, Don't want anybody thinking we're stupid or crazy, And he's more into electronic stuff. He said it sounded like a speaker square waving.
A speaker square waving.
Yeah, the way he described it is if whatever makes the cone go back and forth, he goes, if it gets arced out in there or something like that, it's called a square wave, and it makes an ungodly sound. And I said, well, it sounded to me like the TV late at night and you wake up and it's going,
right.
But it was really super loud. That's why I couldn't believe that nobody else has seen it, nobody else said anything about it. I mean, maybe everybody's got the same idea I did, just, some things are better left unsaid.
Well, what's interesting is that all of the other sightings in which there were photographs, everyone said that they either could not hear anything or they heard, in Chad's case, a kind of hissing sound. And
he did hear something?
Yes, and he emailed me asking if I thought that there was any danger from whatever they were emitting that had this electrostatic-y sound, but not loud.
I have this thing in my mind, those plasma balls? Have you ever seen one of those things? They got the little things inside of, let's go out to the balls.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I felt like, I just had this feeling, that the thing's emitting plasma or something, and that's what's keeping it afloat. That's when I smelled what I thought was ozone.
If this object and these other dragonfly-moving, strange, drone-like objects that people have photographed and now you and Tim have seen are something that our government has either back-engineered or produced, what
I'm going to be pissed.
What do you think their mission is?
I don't know. Can I tell you what I felt about it all along? I'm really good about having feelings towards stuff. I almost felt like the thing was prospecting, like it was a research vehicle. If something, it's looking for something. They're looking for gold. That's what I thought.
If these dragonfly-moving drones are not made by our government or any other government on Earth and are in fact some kind of a monitoring device from some other place,
someplace else?
Yeah, how does that leave you thinking and feeling?
Well, I'm concerned a little bit about the whole situation because I know that whatever it was, I felt like it was aware that I was watching it, and it knew I could see it, okay? I felt like it knew I was looking at it. And it's something that I just felt inside. I felt like this thing knows that I'm looking at it, and it knows it can be seen, and it didn't like it, and it wanted to get out of there. And it was like, when I said it was looking for something, real fidgety back and forth, it was like it was looking for a place to run. What is up with this? This is so weird. And if it is something from somewhere else, we're being surveyed. Okay? Those are surveyors, and I don't know what they're looking for, but I think they're prospecting for something. If it is somebody surveying from another world, I guess they got the right idea because they're making it so that we can't see them.
Brent Uro's remarkable airbrush paintings of what he and Tim saw are in my Earth Files report. Tim's drawing is so similar to Chad's photos from May 6, 2007. And Tim was underneath the craft and could see the appendages more clearly. Brent was higher and looking at more of a side view. And one other footnote, Brent and others who have seen these dragonfly-moving craft have said they felt like the craft was watching them as if the craft are somehow alive and conscious. And that reminds me of U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, who wrote in his 1997 groundbreaking book, The Day After Roswell, that American government investigators discovered as they investigated crash retrieval of some kind of craft from outer space, they discovered biological nerve tissue in UFO disk computers and concluded that the craft were alive, conscious, and directly communicating with the alien pilot. So, Whitley, could any of these dragonfly-moving drones also be biological androids monitoring this planet?
Well, Linda, I was in one of these things once, many years ago, which I described, I believe, in my book Transformation, or perhaps in the next one, Breakthrough. And as I approached the thing, it was immediately clear to me that it was a living being, that the thing that was flying was itself alive. And I have no question in my mind that was true that night. And there's also no little or any question in my mind, but that my experience was quite real. So I can well understand his impressions. They sounded extremely familiar to me.
And Isaac, who submitted the CARET document, the entire context of his Palo Alto lab report is extraterrestrial technology-backed engineering. That's what the report says. And what I wonder is, why would something that might be based on an organic kind of structure that could do monitoring, surveying, prospecting on this planet and other planets, why would it suddenly make this really loud static noise if something were going wrong?
Well, maybe what was wrong was he was seeing it. Maybe that was what was wrong. I had an experience with one on December the 7th that was just extraordinary, and I'll never forget it. It's, for those of you who want to read about it, it's in Whitley's journal on unknowncountry.com. It's one or two journals back. And I think that these are highly advanced organisms, technological organisms, I guess you would call them. And what they may be capable of or what they may be doing, I don't know. But I do know one thing, that they are a step beyond where we were in the past. We've never seen anything like this on Earth before. And I am quite certain that whatever they are doing, it will get done. And we will then probably know what their intent was.
If you were betting, do you think that there are going to be more in May and June of 2008? We're already in May.
I don't know whether there will be more or not, but I do know this. If this ever comes out in the wash, it's going to turn out that they have identified us both as species and as individuals in ways that we ourselves have not even yet begun even to understand, that it is far beyond anything like genetic testing or anything like that, that we are being identified, categorized, and in preparation for something that is probably coming right at us like a runaway freight train, and we don't even know it.
I feel it as well, and I wonder if the dragonflies do show up again in 2008, would it suggest to you that they still haven't accomplished their work, or what?
Well, I don't know, Linda. First of all, if you notice, we don't see them in that many different areas. They seem to not be spread out, for example, all around the world, but only in certain places are they visible. This could be because that there are limitations in the technology that it cause them to be visible in certain areas. And what those limitations might be very surprising. For example, if these are machines that are moving not only through space but also through time, the way they maneuver and what you see of them and when you see it might be dependent upon laws of physics of which we know essentially nothing. So I don't know when they will be finished with what they are doing, or even what they are doing, and why, if it has something to do with us, do we always see them seemingly in isolated areas like in the countryside? Because maybe that isn't what it has to do with. Maybe they're mapping something else about the Earth that we know nothing about.
And who is responsible for pushing the CGI Photoshop explanation as if that is the only possible explanation?
Well, there's two groups, idiots and the intelligence community working with them and helping them, undoubtedly. And some of it has obviously had a very CIA-scented locomotion with elaborate websites being produced outside of the continental United States, et cetera, that sort of thing. And the German fellow whose website made claims, but then he wouldn't actually talk to you because, of course, if he was working for the Central Intelligence Agency, it's illegal for him to propagandize in the United States. So he wouldn't. His quote unquote perfectly usable English wasn't good enough for the radio, as he told you. Now that's one possibility, and. But I want to we have a little bit of time today, so I want to go on, and there's a very interesting thing in the Unknown Country newsletter relating the pearls to the drones that kind of surprised me. I thought it was a rather good idea because we now know that one of those mysterious pearls that were being mapped in Google Maps back in 2005 and don't seem to have shown up since, apparently crashed in Decatur, Alabama, week before last.
Right.
And I am wondering, this thing is so real, and the man who saw it was describing people coming and picking it up and so forth. And I just wonder if there isn't some kind of connection between things like that and the drones, and that there isn't a very human element in this whole thing, that you're not looking at little aliens, strange gray aliens at all, but more like something like time travelers or even a military operation using highly sophisticated technology for reasons that we on the outside aren't privy to, and I think probably illegally so, by the way.
And I have received, I think now it is 3 emails that seem to be what I would consider substantive, meaning the sources seem to be volunteering information that I can check out. And their bottom line is they have direct knowledge about these white spheres, and that they are saying to me that I am definitely on the right track in raising the question about the source being off-planet.
Well, that's interesting because the other side of the coin is the source may be off-planet, but the management appears to be very much on-planet, at least part of it.
Right.
So, and there seems to be a synergy of some kind, and that gets me back to May of 1989 when the implant was put in my left ear. It was done by 2 people who I saw clearly. I mean, it was dark, but I saw them. They were definitely human beings, a man and a woman.
Right, and there has been that sort of sub-theme in the human abduction syndrome going all the way back to the early work of Bud Hopkins, in which he had the Debbie Jordan case, where she also appeared to have been taken from her home by military people, and that they also did some sort of an implant in her ear.
Well, exactly, and in her case, it couldn't be found, and maybe or maybe they never tried to find it, I don't know, because back in those days, we assumed that they would never be visible, and there were people running around trying to get people to pay to have them psychically removed and stuff like that. It turned out they're very visible and very real.
And you know what? These strange, we'll call them dragonfly drones because everybody says that's what they move like. That with that big crown of all of those wires, which may or may not have something to do with how they gather energy from magnetic lines around the Earth or who knows what. But, it occurred to me, what if these, we'll call them drones, could be used to both transmit and receive, possibly even from technologies such as implants in the human abduction syndrome?
Well, I wouldn't be at all surprised. They're certainly used for something, but that thing that sticks down from the bottom of them makes it look like something to do with some sort of surveying of the Earth. I keep getting back to that.
And that is exactly what Brent Uro felt intuitively, that he was looking at something that didn't want to be seen, was out on a survey, and he had this really strong intuitive impression, who knows, it might have been telepathic, that whatever this drone is, it was looking for metal or something in the earth, and he felt that it was looking for gold.
Well, Linda Moulton Howe, thank you very much.
3 classes of the impossible.
Yes, when usually people say, oh, that's impossible, like, a UFO, I mean, they can't reach the Earth. stars are too far away. Usually you're talking about a civilization maybe 100 years more advanced than us. But, open your mind to different kinds of possibilities. A class 1 impossibility, I say, is something that is impossible for 10 years, 50 years, maybe 100 years. But a class 2 impossibility, open your mind to the possibility that a civilization may be thousands of years, millions of years ahead of us, in which case interstellar travel is not such a big deal for them. But, of course, there are some things which are probably totally impossible. Perpetual motion machines, even though we've tried very hard to build them, so far no one has ever successfully built a machine that gives you energy from nothing.
And you can't even get a patent on a perpetual motion machine, as I understand it.
That's right. The patent office puts pretty strict conditions on perpetual motion machines. There have been too many swindles in the past. I'm not saying that it's totally impossible. I'm just saying that there have been so many charlatans that have swindled millions of dollars. And in fact, I list some of them in my book, Physics of the Impossible. That's where the patent office is gun-shy about perpetual motion machines.
Talking about the U.S. government, it's an adage almost in the conspiracy world that the U.S. government's black science projects or hidden science projects are at least 10 years and maybe as much as 25 years in advance of what is seen in the open literature. How advanced do you think we are in our deepest secret world?
Well, it's really no accident that invisibility research, which is just hitting the headlines now, is funded by the United States Pentagon. I mean, if you think about it, it's actually quite natural that they would fund the leading work on invisibility. When I teach optics at the university, I used to tell my students that invisibility was impossible. It violated the laws of physics. I wrote down the laws of physics on a blackboard and I said, see, look, invisibility is impossible. Well, I was wrong. And so was every single physics textbook on the planet Earth. All the textbooks are being revised now because 2 years ago at Duke University, under microwave radiation, they actually showed that light, electromagnetic light, can wrap around an object so that it becomes invisible. Think of a boulder. You put a boulder in a river. Downstream from the boulder, you don't know there's a boulder upstream because water wraps around the boulder. Same thing for microwave radiation. And just a few months ago, as the book was going to press, at Caltech, the University of Karlsruhe in Germany, and the Ames Laboratory in Iowa, they were able to make red light and green light.
From Nashville, this is William Henry. This is Dreamland. Welcome, everyone. Theoretical physicist Michio Kaku was 8 years old when Einstein died in 1955. And he remembers seeing a picture of his mysterious unfinished manuscript lying on his desk and hearing adults talk in hushed tones about the physicist's life, his death, and his impossible dream of unifying the laws of physics. Kaku was to make it his life's goal to pursue this dream. Dr. Kaku holds the Henry Semet Chair in Theoretical Physics at the City University of New York. He's a leading authority on the future and on Einstein's theory of everything. Cultivating a love for futuristic technology that began as a child, today he's known globally as the visionary co-founder of string field theory, one of the main branches of string theory, which is the leading candidate for the unified field theory. He could be the first person to read the mind of God. Michio Kaku is the author of the international bestsellers Hyperspace, a scientific odyssey through parallel universes, time warps in the 10th dimension, and Visions, how science will revolutionize the 21st century. His latest book, Physics of the Impossible, is a scientific exploration into the world of phasers, force fields, teleportation, and time travel. His website is www.mkaku, that's Kaku.org. While he believes human civilization is currently undergoing its most critical transition, he would likely agree that now is the time to dream the impossible dreams. His work gives us courage to reach out with every ounce of imagination and touch the unreachable stars, both inner and outer. This is our quest, and we are fortunate to have Michio as our guide and as our honored guest. Michio, welcome to Dreamland.
Glad to be on Dreamland.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so inspiring following your work over these years, and now with your new book out, you're getting ready to do events at the Smithsonian, the Franklin Institute, Caltech, MIT, the Hayden Planetary Museum. So thank you once again for sharing this time with us.
Thank you. And the book, by the way, just hit number 18 on the New York Times bestseller list. This was quite unexpected. The book is now officially on the New York Times bestseller list.
Well, congratulations. Thanks for making that announcement. Something we try to do here on Dreamland is keep our listeners on the cutting edge of science and technology and to push the limits of the possible. I mean, that's why I think there's such a thirst for that, and you've probably found that in your own work.
That's right. Everywhere I go, I see a real thirst for knowledge. Publishers and movie people intend, in a way, consistent with invisibility. This is amazing. I mean, think about it. Within 10 years, we may be able to make an object invisible to a single color. Within a few decades, perhaps to all three primary colors. And after that, Harry Potter, watch out.
Right, exactly. That's one of the things I loved about the book is your use of not only the science fiction world, but also the world of films. People can relate to this stuff because they see it in the films.
That's right. And, a lot of people come up to me and say, well, beam me up, Scotty.
Right.
That's not possible.
Yeah.
Well, believe it or not,
yeah,
we have already teleported individual particles of light called photons. The world's record, by the way, is 600 meters. We teleported light 600 meters across the Danube River. And beryllium atoms now, cesium atoms have been teleported. Within 10 years, I suspect the first molecule, maybe water, will be teleported. Within a few decades, maybe the first DNA, maybe the first virus. And after that, well, Captain Kirk is more difficult because he's quite large, 10 trillion cells. But, Star Trek takes place in the 23rd century. That gives us enough time to be able to teleport him.
Yeah, going back to what we were talking about a moment ago, I mean, Earth is no longer and hasn't been the center of the solar system for a long time. The solar system, we know, is not the center of the Milky Way any longer, and the Milky Way is not the center of the universe, nor is the universe the center of possibly our multiverse. What is happening to human consciousness at this time?
Yeah, it used to be that only mystics and charlatans would talk about other worlds, unseen worlds, but now this is front and center the discussion within theoretical physics. I work in something called string theory, and I still remember for years and years other scientists would snicker at us because, these strings vibrate in a higher dimension. And so people would come up to me and say, well, beam me up, Scotty. Where are these higher dimensions? Sounds like the Twilight Zone for me. Well, they're not laughing anymore. If you've been reading the New York Times, Science Magazine, Discover Magazine, all of them have been devoting lots of ink to string theory, which exists in 10 or 11-dimensional hyperspace. So things that were once considered unbelievably far-fetched are now pretty much taken for granted. Every university in the world teaches this now.
Incredible. Dr. Kaku, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to ask you, everyone needs a symbol for the impossible, right? And what if everyone's working on an impossible idea? I'd like to know what other impossible ideas you're working on.
Okay.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're continuing with Dr. Michio Kaku, the author of Physics of the Impossible, a scientific exploration into the world of phasers, force fields, teleportation, and time travel. Dr. Kaku, we have crossed a line between old and new humanity. Talk about what all of this means for us on an individual level.
In my book, I even talk about bigger vistas than just invisibility, teleportation, or ray guns. We're entering a new era in terms of scanning outer space. Two developments. First of all, this year, the Kepler satellite goes up in orbit that will detect Earth-like twins of the Earth in outer space. We're going to have an existential shock later this year, looking up at the night sky and realizing that our satellites are sensitive enough now to begin to detect tiny Earth-like twins of our Earth orbiting another star in a familiar constellation in the night sky. Now, that's not enough. Get this now. One of the founders of Microsoft, Paul Allen, a billionaire, has given about $30 million to fund a series of radio telescopes that will scan for intelligent signals from aliens from outer space. This is the stuff of science fiction, and now Microsoft billionaire is funding it.
Right. Incredible. So about that impossible idea, what is a symbol of the impossible for you, and what's an impossible idea that you're working on now?
Well, many people think that time travel is way out there. But, believe it or not, we have a theory of time travel. Even Einstein knew this. The first time travel solution was found in 1949 of Einstein's equations at Princeton. Einstein was flabbergasted. He never realized that his own theory could allow loopholes, Einstein thought that time was like a river that meanders, speeds up, and slows down around stars. And we measure that all the time with our satellites, by the way. That's the correct picture. Time is a river. Mm-hmm. But the new wrinkle is that the river of time has whirlpools. Whirlpools.
I love that.
The river of time. It also can fork to two separate rivers. And so now all of a sudden, all bets are off. All of a sudden, we physicists now are writing papers about how, well, an advanced civilization with enough energy, but how an advanced civilization may be able to tie time into knots and perhaps, bend space into a pretzel. So TV people, they say science doesn't sell. People want soap operas. They want cotton in their brain. But, the fact that Stephen Hawking, my colleague, sold over 10 million copies of his books shows that there's a real hunger out there. And recently I've been filming with the History Channel, the Universe series, and that got the third year. The third year got approved. People want to know what's out there. Is anyone out there? They want to know what is our role in the universe. They really want to know these things.
Recently, legendary writer and science evangelist Arthur C. Clarke completed his 90th and final orbit of the sun. It's been said he was so influential, a visionary, and contributed so much to technological culture that one could hardly tell where his imagination ends and our reality begins. And I have to say, you're a likely person to follow in his footsteps and take that role now. Do you see yourself in that role?
Well, I see one phrase, one sentence that Arthur C. Clarke said that I quote in the book and I take as a guiding principle, and that is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And things that we consider magic, things that are preposterous, impossible, things that can't possibly exist, well, we physicists take them very seriously because maybe it's just a question of engineering.
Absolutely. And Clarke, as he talked about, he reminisced in his last message to the world about how much the world changed from the 1920s throughout his short lifetime. And you talk about that as well in your book, being the children of World War II-era Japanese parents who were held in concentration camps. And talk about that time period and the influences that came into your life at that time.
Well, think about the world that our parents grew up in. That was before airplanes, before automobiles, in fact, electricity, telephone. And now we have, the Internet, we have iPods, we have gadgets galore. But now think about the future. Think about the possibility of invisibility, teleportation, telepathy, starships, antimatter engines. These things our children could very well take for granted. And in the book, Physics of the Impossible, I really get down to the nitty-gritty. I interview the scientists who are making invisibility possible, the scientists working on teleportation. This is just not idle fantasy and after-dinner chatter. This is real work done by real scientists to really show that things that are impossible could very well become possible.
And you divide the seemingly impossible, and you have that in quotes, into three classes. Talk about these